Welcome to the Spiritual Gifts Podcast. In this two-part episode, we present Jay McSwain, one of the most influential spokespersons in the spiritual gifts arena today. Jay's journey began by reading his Bible one morning before work. One verse jumped out and changed his life, and in time, the lives of over 1 million people. Join us as Jay shares how that verse created the Place Spiritual Gift curriculum. For 20 years, he has presented what can be for Christians who do not know their place in the church. Countless lives and churches throughout the United States and Canada have been changed. Whether you're at the start of your spiritual journey or looking to deepen your understanding and application of your gifts, this conversation is sure to inspire and empower you. Get ready to explore how recognizing and embracing your spiritual potential can lead you and others to extraordinary growth and fulfillment. Here is Jay McSwain.
It was actually a verse in the Bible that wasn't specifically related to spiritual gifts, but it is what I have built my life upon. And it was in 1995. I'd been to seminary, got out of vocational ministry, and I went to work in a family business. And at one point, our family was one of the largest private home builders in the United States. Okay. And we made a lot of money doing that, but I wasn't very happy. And Barry, I became the poster child pew sitter, chair sitter, whatever your church has. That was me. Long story, I got back in 1995, and my wife and I became the Sunday school directors for a group of young single adults. And it was a church running probably about 3,000 to 4,000. And probably in 1995, there were about as many churches that were that size as there are churches today that run 15,000. It was a pretty large church, but we only had about 8 or 10 young single adults that were involved in Bible study. And so we became the directors for that group, and we started in August of 95, and a month later, I read the verse that changed the entire course of my life. It was a Wednesday morning before I went to work, and it was September 1995. I read Matthew 16:25. I have actually worn that verse on this bracelet that I have since 1995, and it is where Jesus said, "You'll find your life as you give it away. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." So I walk into my little class that we'd started growing in that first month, and I had them open their Bible to Matthew 16:25. And I said, "We're going to read that verse together." I said, "Not only are we going to read the verse together," I said, "we're going to start living it out in our church." And what's really cool, Barry, is those kids aren't 23, 24 anymore. They're in their 40s, but in the church I'm a part of now, some of them are still discipling teenagers in our church. We got involved in our community. We started going to senior adult retirement homes and doing monthly birthday parties. And then we would have a Bible study. We had a 23-year-old graduate of Georgia Tech that would lead the Bible study, and watching a 23-year-old lead an 83-year-old, it's pretty cool. Started going and spending time with kids at an orphanage. We started a ministry in downtown Atlanta at Grady Memorial Hospital, where those that had a passion for little babies that were born addicted to crack because their moms were, those young professionals would get off in the afternoons, go spend time with those kids, read scripture to them, sing to them. We started a knitting ministry in Janessa DeFree's apartment on Sunday afternoon, where we were teaching men how to knit little mittens and bonnets for the babies at Grady Memorial. We started a ministry called ASAP, Atlanta Singles Are Preparing, ... And we started renting hotel ballroom space in Midtown Atlanta. And we would first want those young professionals to come to Christ. And then we wanted to help them get involved in a church, which our church would help them grow. And that was 1995. And that was our family's business was growing. People were telling me I was successful because I was part of that business. But you ever notice how sometimes people can say you're successful, but inwardly you don't feel a lot of significance in your life? And that was me. In 1995, God introduced me to that verse, and I don't know today if what my life is about, if people would say I'm successful, but I am the poster child today that if you give your life away, you'll find it. And then, long and short, to end the story, I had left my family's business in 96, and my wife and I went and we served as full-time volunteers at Golden Gate Seminary, which is now Gateway Seminary. But that was where we were helping with some research for the school. And from there, I got asked to go on a church staff in Oklahoma. I would spend the rest of my life helping people figure out how to give their life away. And that's where resources like spiritual gifts came into play. That was kind of a cool experience for me. So I leave the family business. I don't think I had a great plan of what I was going to do with my life. I'd spent some time figuring out, I think I might have enough financial resource that if I managed things right, I could probably do what I wanted to do. And I was on a board at Golden Gate Seminary, and the president and I decided that we'd put together a research division. And so my wife and I move out there, and in the end of 97, Southern Baptists have what they call a metro, and I call it a little club that if you meet the right formulas, you're big enough, you have enough financial resources in your budget and some other metrics that they use, you can be part of the metro, what they call it now. I think they have the mega metro. Well, they were meeting in 1997 in San Francisco. And a man that had mentored my wife and I when we first got married, he had left our church and gone to Houston's First Baptist Church. And he called up and he said, Jay, he said, Bonnie and I are going to be in San Francisco for this meeting. We would love to go to dinner with you and Ginger. That's my wife. Would you guys want to? I said, David, we'd love to. And so we met, and Barry, it was so funny. We're sitting there at dinner, and when I left the family business, I told my wife this. I said, the worst thing that'll ever happen in our life is that we will be an utter failure and I'll have to go work on a church staff somewhere. Be careful what you say, right? And my friend David, we're sitting there at dinner, and he said, Jay, he said, hey, I know what you're trying to do with your foundation and trying to figure out a way to serve pastors and all that. But would you come to Houston? Would you consider coming to Houston's First and leading our young single adult ministry? Because we've done pretty well with our singles group here in Atlanta. That little class had gone from 10 to 200 in a year, and it was a pretty cool experience. And when I said to my friend David, we would think about it, my wife like to fell out right there in the restaurant. Well, ended up the next 2 weeks, 5 of those churches that were in that meeting called up and asked if we would consider going to be their young adult single pastor.
Wow.
Long and short, that really what I still to this day, I'm a lot older today than in 1997, but I still love young adults even today. But that wasn't really what God wanted. One of those churches, Council Road Baptist Church in Bethany, Oklahoma, right outside Oklahoma City, called up and said, our church is growing really fast. We're having about 400 or so new members a year, but our front door is as wide as our back door. And would you come and help us close the back door by getting people involved? Now, Barry, I don't have a spiritual gift assessment at that time, but I did have a promise from God. that if I would give my life away, I would find it. And I helped a lot of young adults in Atlanta learn that verse very well. And I said that I would, long and short. I got there, I started looking around the country at what was being done in the area of helping assimilate people into ministry. Of course, I saw things like Shape out of Saddleback. I saw Network out of Willow Creek. There's a resource called Uniquely You, Mels Carbonell. I think one of the people that, you know that song, I was country when country wasn't cool? Well, there was a lady by the name of Sue Mallory, and she had worked with Leadership Network, if you know the name, Bob Buford, and she was really speaking toward and helping churches with processes. Long and short, I looked at a lot of stuff. I know that the church in Memphis, a big church in Memphis, had a process. I called anybody. If they were doing something, I called them. And I really didn't like what I was seeing. I saw parts of things in Network I really liked. I kept looking at Shape, and people kept telling me that the process was good, but the instruments, like the spiritual gift assessment, was really weak, almost pretty non-existent. And so I thought to myself, wow, I put together the back end process of my family's business that we kind of became known for around the country. We hired the number one consultant in America in construction, which is what my family has been doing since 1956. Taught me a lot about putting together processes and training. And I thought my undergraduate was sociology, had a master's in theology, and I thought, wow, whatever I can't do, I can go hire somebody to help me. And so I did. I hired a psychologist, Dr. Cynthia Quick, and I hired a guy who was a professional researcher. And so I said, I'll put my own tool together. In the beginning, I did not have my own spiritual gifts assessment and my own personality assessment. There was a lady that was so gracious to our ministry, Florence Littauer. And Florence I think she's still alive. She's in her 80s. Her husband, Fred, has passed away, but they were the most gracious couple in letting us use the personality assessment that Florence had. And every time we would use 100, we agreed on a price. And then I ended up, and I hate to say this, but the church I was a part of, they did not give anybody credit, but they had a spiritual gift assessment. Nobody's name is on it. When I tested it in our church, I used it. But then I went to Mels Carbonell. And Mels, you probably know Mels, he has an excellent personality and spiritual gift assessment. So Mels and I made an agreement, and that we would pay him to use his personality, spiritual gifts. He would not let me incorporate it into my workbook, PLACE. I think he didn't trust me. And that I was okay. I was just getting started. So when people would go through PLACE, place, they had two books. They had the book that Mels had, and then they had the rest of ours. And I figured out what Mels, the quality wasn't very good. The quality of his paper book wasn't very good. And then I figured out that we were his biggest customer. And I figured out what we could print that little thing for. And we were paying way too much. And so the business part of me comes out. And I went to Mels and I said, Mels, we got to lower the price on what we're paying you. And I really don't want to keep using two books. Nope, that's the way it's going to be, Jay. So the long and short, I pulled together my little team, and I had one of the men that had been one of the translators of the New International Version, New American Standard. I pulled together some pastors. I probably looked at, I don't know, 30 or 40 different spiritual gift assessments that were out there. And me and my little team, we decided we could write our own. And so it was about 2000. I've been using Mails's for about a year and a half. About 2000, I wrote my own and put it all together. And I don't know, Barry, it was about 6, 7, 8 months. We hadn't given an order to Uniquely You in about 6 or 7, 8 months. And our office gets a phone call. And, even in 2000, it showed up on the phone where the call was coming from, and it said Uniquely You. And it was a lady, said she was a pastor's wife, and she started quizzing the person at our office about our assessment. And she gets off the phone, and she walks in my office, and she goes, "You'll never guess who that was. It was Uniquely You, but camouflaging it." And the lady may have been a pastor's wife. I don't know. I said, "Get me that phone and let me call Mel's." I called Mel's up. And he said, "Jay," he said, "why did you do this?" And I said, "Mel's, I kept telling you that I felt like we were paying too much and the quality, and I didn't want 2 books. And he said, "I wish I could say that you plagiarized me, but you didn't. But I did. I will tell you what I did do, as you've looked at mine. I did take the brilliance that I give to Mel's, where he took personality and gifts and shows you how you can have the same gift, different personality, and it looks really different." And so I incorporated that same concept, which I'm grateful. And I learned a lot from Mel's. When you live in the space as long as I have, you really look at the Bruce Bugby's of the world, the Rick Warrens, the Sue Mallorys, the Mel's Carbonells. And, if you're a grateful person, you say thank you for the investment that you went before someone like me. And I'll always be grateful for those people that I just named, because I really do consider them to be some mentors in my life. And some of them I, got to be up close with a little bit more than others. But that was a little bit about how our instrument came together. And it was funny. I'll tell you one more quick thing. So when I was putting together the personality and spiritual gifts together, I didn't really like the way a lot of personality assessments were. You know how they give you 4 words and you pick the one that is most like you and least like you. And I didn't like that. So I decided, just like in the spiritual gifts, I would put a statement, in a sentence. And instead of numbering it 1 to 5, I would give 4 answers in a statement, like when it comes to thinking, with 4 different answers. And I went to Dr. Quick and I said, "Dr. Quick," I said, "can we do this?" And she said, "Jay, you can do anything if you validate it." And so spiritual gift assessment, personality, abilities, we had to then take the journey of validating what we'd put together. And I'm glad that for the most part, there are always some outliers that say this thing whether it be the spiritual gifts or whatever assessment, this thing is totally wrong. But fortunately, enough people, which I guess we're hitting somewhere close to about 1 million people now, have taken it, and I guess it's been pretty accurate through the years. I sit down, Barry, probably with about 300 people one-on-one at my church every year. And we figured out for an event we were doing last week that just at my church alone, we've taken about 3,500 people through Place, which is pretty cool. We've had about 1 million people use the resource, but in my church where I'm on staff, and when I say taking them through, we sit down with them one-on-one, not just give them an assessment, not just give them teaching, but we sit down with them. I'll tell you a story, and I could tell you hundreds, but one that really touched me. I want to say the year was 2001, 2002. And these were all new members of our church that were going through Place. And there were about 30, 35 people. And we go through 5 weeks, PLACE. And the last night, the E is for experiences of life. And we're finishing up, and on the profile that they complete, church member sent. So they tell how long, if they are a church member of our church. Many people that go through aren't. And we allow people that aren't members to go through it. Well, where it said church member since, on Mike's profile, it said 3 weeks. And Barry, at the end of the time, I finished early, that was a miracle within itself. Maybe I'd add that to my spiritual gift assessment miracles, because I finished early. And I said, would any of you that have sat down in the group setting where you were in groups of 3 or 4 and you shared a life experience that impacted you, would any of you like to share with the entire group? And Barry, we had 3 or 4 people that just stood up where they were and told. There was a guy, Mike. He didn't only stand up, he came and stood beside me. And Mike was what we call the I personality in the DISC model. Very ID. You know, the I is very inspiring, the D is very driven. And so Mike starts talking about coming to know Christ in the experience. It had so happened that he had been led to the Lord in the hospital a few weeks earlier by one of our members. He accepted Christ in the hospital, got out, he came and he joined our church. And he's telling this story about his journey over these last few weeks. He had cancer. And he starts to get emotional. Now, let me back up and tell you what his top 2 spiritual gifts were. Teaching and hospitality. Okay, those were his top 2 gifts. So he's getting emotional. And you can tell that he's getting a little bit embarrassed because he's starting to cry and can't get himself together. And all of a sudden, standing right beside me, 30, 35 new members, he blurts out a word. It starts with a D and it ends with an N, and it's a cuss word. You probably got the idea, okay? He cusses right there in front of the group. And every one of the eyes in that room looked straight at me. Now, to be honest, it was kind of funny. It was a serious moment, but it was kind of funny. Well, Mike, he picks me to sit down with him one-on-one because we had numerous people in our church that are what we call place connection coaches. Mike picks me. And he sits down. Now, remember, he's got the gift of teaching. And he wants to become a teacher at our church. And we talked about where he was in his spiritual maturity. And he said, you know, Jay, I know I'm not supposed to cuss in church. He said, it just got away from me a little bit. And we talked about like where he was, that teaching, probably he wasn't going to be teaching one of our Bible study groups next week, okay? But Mike really wanted to serve at our church. I mean, he really wanted to serve. He had the gift of hospitality. And so he became a greeter at our church. And Barry, for the next several months, I would tell our pastor, anything beyond Mike's door was pretty secondary. I mean, and it wasn't just with me, but every person that would walk through his door I think he worked all week long to have these little one sentence blessings to people. I mean, it was just so cool. I'd find his door every Sunday because it was like, man, that was everything else behind there because he blessed people immensely. Well, end of the story. About 6 months after Mike became a greeter at our church, the cancer that he had took his life. And I think just you said what's one of those stories to know that for the last 6 months of Mike's life, Mike had a purpose. Mike took a gift that God gave him that I figured out he had used for years and years outside of God's kingdom work to probably bless a lot of people. But he used it for the last 6 months for eternal purposes. And I can only imagine when I get to heaven that Mike's going to walk up to me. He's going to be the greeter at the door that I go to. And he said, Jay, I'm going to take you down to the front row. And if you think it was good on that side, wait till you get down to the front row and begin to worship and experience what you're going to do now. But I could tell you story after story, but I remember that so well as if it happened yesterday. And just the thrill of knowing that that man discovered a gift that God gave him and used it to impact people's lives that came to worship week after week at our church.
Thank you for joining us for My Spiritual Gift Story Part 1 with Jay McSwain. Look for Part 2 in the next broadcast and hear valuable information for you and your church. If you ever miss a broadcast, you can always listen online. Our website is spiritualgiftspodcast.com. There, you can stream the program or download the MP3 for free. Again, that is spiritualgiftspodcast.com. Thank you for emailing this podcast to any church leaders or young people you can inspire. Let us see if God will use us to change the world for good and God's glory. Thanks for listening.